And we're off and running. Hey, Lexi, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. As we were just chatting, you have a very nice dorm room. So
Yeah, thank you.
much different from mine, so many decades ago. So kudos to you for that. And we'll give people an idea of where you are and what you're doing and then why we're talking. But first, one, I want to thank you for doing this. It's quite generous of your time, given that you're approaching your final days before the Thanksgiving break of 2020, which is really probably the most boring year
Yeah,
in
honestly.
yeah, exactly, in recent memory. But I also want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, I hope you get a good take on what we do here from this conversation. And if you're a returning member, I thank you for your continued patronage. For everybody, remember to hit the subscribe button below with the bell so that you'll get alerted from when new episodes get posted, which happens every Thursday morning. And so for those of you who may not know me or may not remember, my name is Sean O'Rourke. I'm the host of Did You Know That? Question mark, which is a weekly chat show where I get to talk to people about interesting and sometimes annoying topics. And today I think is going to be especially interesting. So, Lexi, why don't you tell the folks who you are and then we'll get started.
So I'm Lexi Arnold. I'm from New Jersey. Right now, I'm in North Carolina. I go to school at Elon University, and I'm here just to talk about issues with mental health and also just about my story in life and how I got here.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to undersell you
Yeah.
because you've had, you're in college, but you've had a pretty interesting experience. And while we are going to talk about mental health, part of your story is very unique because your mental health really evolved out of physical trials and tribulations that you've been through for a very long time. So, why don't you tell the folks sort of what syndrome you were diagnosed with and then how that sort of impacted your early life and where you are now?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile EDS. And so I was
There will be
recently,
a link to what that is in the video
um,
details.
yeah, so that really is a connective tissue disorder. I was recently just diagnosed with that during the COVID times, but it's a genetic disorder. And so I've had it my whole life. And so I never really understood what was going on with me because hypermobile EDS really affects your entire system. So I had sinus issues, I had jaw issues, I fractured my spine a couple of times. So it was a lot. And that's just the start of it. And I was constantly in and out of doctor's appointments. At this point, I have had, I want to say, about like 5 or 6 surgeries in my life, and I'm only 19. So it's a lot. And
And we're
I had
not
all
talking minor surgeries
no, we're
either.
not talking
So
minor
can
surgery.
you, at 19, what are the five
Yeah.
surgeries you've had?
So well, tonsils and anoids, I had that actually when I was like an infant because
Mm-hmm.
I was getting sinus infections. And so because of that, I also had to get 2 sinus surgeries where they had to go through my nose and do I don't even know what, and take out some disease from there. I had a jaw surgery where they had to go in and move my joint back because it had fallen in my jaw to from my cheeks to my jaw, and
So
uh,
essentially, your jaw dislocated.
my jaw dislocated, and it
Mm-hmm.
had been like that for a couple years, and we were kind of holding off, and it had become so eroded that they were like, "You have a jaw of an 80-year-old." It was pretty bad, so they had to fix my jaw. I recently just had a spinal fusion, which is a very major spinal
Mm-hmm.
surgery. So that's yeah, they're definitely not minor surgeries, something that most 19-year-olds have not gone through in their life.
Yeah.
But it is something that it's become my new reality or my regular reality for my entire life.
And so everybody sort of who's watched these episodes knows that the guests and I talked beforehand, and you and I had a pretty good conversation before recording this episode. And so the surgeries aren't recent. I mean, you mentioned it. You were a baby when your tonsils and adenoids were out, but a lot of these surgeries you
Yeah.
remember. And
Yeah.
these doctor's visits have happened throughout your 19 years.
Yeah. I mean, my first sinus surgery was when I was 6, again, then when I was 11. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, I had my jaw surgery, and I just this summer had my spinal surgery. But I first fractured my spine also when I was 6 years old. So you don't really imagine a 6-year-old walking around in a back brace and can't bend down to
Mm-hmm.
tie her shoes, but that was me.
Right.
And that's something that I've been dealing with my entire life. Yeah.
And so let's now sort of segue, because you've been very open. In fact, there'll be a link to the blog post that you posted about your struggles with just your mental health. And anybody who's just listened to you sort of rattle off your surgeries probably would have a real appreciation and understanding of any kind of struggle with mental, just normalcy, considering your body was not treating you like it should. But you told me your family actually has a sort of a history with, I believe you said depression, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of us that have depression and anxiety, a good amount of us. And it's just, I didn't actually know about it until I was older, until I was diagnosed that that it has run in my family, but it does. But I honestly believe even if didn't run in my family with everything I'd gone through, I think I probably wouldn't have gotten there.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's just how it is.
Yeah. I mean, you would
Yeah.
expect it to be normal.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't go through that and not come out and say, hey, what the F's going on here?
Yeah.
And so when were you officially diagnosed?
I was officially diagnosed with depression and anxiety going into my freshman year of high school. So like
Okay.
8th grade, freshman year of high school. So about 14 years old, I was officially diagnosed, but I'd been experiencing symptoms for a lot longer than that. Thankfully, my parents recognized those symptoms because of our family history, and they brought me to get help.
So how old do you think you were when you first started experiencing symptoms?
Honestly, I'm not even sure. I think that I remember being such a happy kid, but I know there must have been signs throughout. I'd be pretty negative, and not be able to see the positive aspects in life because I had just been so exposed to just one bad thing after another happening that I had a hard time seeing those positives in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember about in 7th grade, my dad kind of called me out on it, and then I got depressed from being called out on it, which is totally not his fault. But that's the first time I actually remember having being recognizing that I had those symptoms was like in
Sure.
7th grade when I got called out on it, and I never thought about it like that before. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, wow, yeah, I have been kind of negative. I don't know why. I can't really control it. That's like the first time I actually remember having those symptoms.
So I've often asked this to people because it's very hard to get in somebody's head
Yeah.
on anything. You can, and again, you and I talked about this. One of the reasons why I think mental illness is sometimes difficult for people to accept is because they can't see it.
Yeah.
They can see physical ailments and they can accept those, but they can't see the mental side of it. Can you give people an idea in whatever description you can come up with how you feel or how you start to think when you feel sort of the anxiety coming on or a depressive episode coming on?
Yeah. So, a lot of times people are like, it doesn't make any sense. It just comes out of nowhere. They're being crazy. And honestly, yeah, it does come out of nowhere. I could be sitting and I'll be completely fine. I've said this in my blog post. I feel like there's this shadow that comes over me, and it's not anything I can control. It's not anything I can even foresee happening. But sometimes there's triggers, sometimes there's not.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, my trigger is my medical issues. And so sometimes I will see that when I'm starting to accumulate a lot of medical issues again, I'm starting to go to a lot of doctor's offices, that is my trigger, and I start getting depressed. And once again, I feel like no one really understands. And that's one side of what could happen, where it's this vicious cycle where for me, what it was that I was getting depressed because I felt like I was this, at the time, 12 or 13-year-old who kept getting all these issues, and I kept being in and out of doctor's appointments, not being with my friends, being left out because I just couldn't make it because I was dealing with something that someone my age shouldn't go through. And I tried to talk to friends about it, and they didn't understand because they were too young. And then I'd get depressed because they didn't understand it. And so it's a lot of times that it starts out little, and then you feel like no one understands. And a lot of times people aren't able to understand because if you haven't gone through it, it just doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
I honestly, I know people that have been completely fine, and then they actually develop depression later in life, and they're like, we've seen both sides of it, and I did not realize this is what it was like, that it could just happen out of nowhere. Another side is that you could just be sitting and there could be absolutely no reason, but you just start feeling kind of like tight chested. You kind of feel faintish. You don't really know what's going on, but you feel antsy. And that can lead to an anxiety or depression episode. There's no rhyme or reason to why people feel like this. And sometimes it's unresolved issues. Sometimes it's a chemical imbalance. But what people have to understand is it's no one's fault. It's no one's being crazy. No one wants to start panicking. Everyone wants to just be happy. So no one's going to, for attention, just start like gasping for air and not being able to talk. That's not anyone's intention. But it is difficult for people who don't have it to understand because it does come out of nowhere, or it seems like it comes out of nowhere. But in reality, these are deep-seated issues that people have dealt with for a while that they just haven't felt comfortable talking about or don't feel like they've been listened to.
So, to that end, obviously, you said your parents recognized it and helped you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do now, Lexi of today, November 2020? What do you do now when you start to feel that shadow start to envelop you? Is there a place where you go? Are you on medication? Do you have a process that you take to try to work it yourself?
Yeah, I've kind of pulled out all the stops on my end. I've been in therapy since 8th grade, and that has helped me tremendously. I've had to change therapists a few times, which is not bad. It's just you have to find the right fit. And sometimes it's different for each part of my life. At first, there was someone I needed to just kind of confirm how I was feeling. And for a while, that's what I needed, is someone just to be like, I understand what you're going through and you're not crazy. Now, right, I've currently switched to someone who's actually delving into my past issues and we're working through them. And that's also been helping. So it really just depends where in life you are and what you want from those therapy sessions. But that's one thing that I'm doing. She's also given me a few exercises that help calm me down when I start getting really anxious, and some new ways of thinking. And I also am on medication. I've switched quite a few times, up dosages,
Yep.
lower dosages, switched medications, added new ones. So I'm on a few different ones, and I have ones to help me calm down, like Xanax, if I get to a point where I can't calm myself down. And I'm not saying that medication is the answer for everything. I think that for some people, it's not, but for some people it is. Like, it really does help if that is what you need, and if that chemical imbalance is there. Medication can help, and it has done me wonders, but that's only because I've done it in combination with therapy.
And your own work. I mean, obviously, you've been very self-motivated to deal with this because
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, did you start something at school or before school? Because I know you have a nonprofit that you started, I think, in high school,
Yeah.
but then you started a support network while
Yes.
you were in school. So let's talk the support network while you were at Elon or
So
whenever you
right,
started it.
we're
What's
really
that
just
entail?
starting it now, actually.
Okay.
So it's a support group for people with disabilities, mental, physical, and biological. So it's not just someone with a physical disability that you can see. It could be depression, anxiety. I'm starting it with one of my friends who's in a wheelchair and one of my friends who also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. We all met through disability resources, and we decided that there wasn't great resources. Of course, Elon does all that they're trying to do, and I totally appreciate that. However, there's only to what extent you could do if you haven't gone through these issues.
Mm-hmm.
So helping someone out that has a biological disability, if you've never gone through it, it's difficult to really understand. And it's also hard for people to reach out to adults to talk about it, especially. So we wanted to create this support group that it's called S Cubes, Student Support Students, because we want to help each other, because we all understand what each other's going through. It's all different, but we all understand the baseline that we feel different and we want to feel heard. And so we feel that students will be more comfortable talking to other students that are similar age, similar background, similar experiences, and give them an outlet to talk to us about it and to help heal each other and help each other get through issues that are going on. And in addition to that, we also want to help be advocates for them, because there are a lot of things that are lacking. A lot of the handicap buttons to open doors, they don't work here, or there's not handicap ramps at all buildings. And, of course, they're trying their best, but we need to do more, and we need to be advocates for those people. There's people who can't live on campus because of there's not handicap accessible ramps to get into the buildings. So we are trying our best to just support them both as like a group and as advocates for them.
Well, it's as you said, if you haven't experienced it, it's very difficult to know what accommodations are needed. Physical is I think, a little bit more obvious than emotional or mental. But I think it's to your point. I know I've not experienced the physical trials that you have, especially at your age. As I've gotten older, things have gotten a little bit worse and whatnot, but nowhere near what you have. So I can't, to your point, my relationship to you would be sort of sympathetic, but I couldn't be empathetic because I just didn't have those kind of experiences. And I think it's great that you're bringing a group together who could empathize. Now, let me ask you, how common or rare is your syndrome?
So it's considered an uncommon disease, but it's also very undiagnosed. There's a lot of people that have it. They say about 1 in 5,000, which it seems like a big, like not a lot, but that is a lot. But there's still so many people that go undiagnosed because they're just passed off as flexible, because that's another symptom, is being very flexible, or, oh, they're just clumsy. So there's a lot more people that have the syndrome that just have gone undiagnosed. So I think it's a lot more common than people realize.
Now, is it a syndrome that hits you from the moment you're born, or do you develop it? So it's right from the beginning.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of research on it. There's no Ehlers-Danlos doctor. There's people who specialize in it in their field, or at least have researched it so they can help. But there's no like specialist Ehlers-Danlos doctor. So they're doing a lot of research, and they're trying, but there's not a lot of volunteers because there's not a lot of like knowledge about it.
Have you been asked to sort of partake in studies or anything?
Yeah, I've done a lot of like surveys to help out. One of the studies is in Paris. So right now I cannot do that. I would love to do that.
Yeah, I was about to say,
I would fly out there right now.
Yeah.
But hopefully I could go to some conventions. And I think that one of the things is you could donate blood and they could kind of test your cells, because they're trying to find out if there's a gene that is linked.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't found that yet, but they know it's genetic. We just haven't found the gene yet to identify an Ehlers-Danlos gene. So I'm hoping that I can help attribute to that once COVID kind of settles down and I could travel to wherever I need to
Right.
get those tests.
So this just occurred to me while we were talking. Obviously, we're recording this in November of 2020. COVID is still in the forefront of the news. Are you in a higher risk category given this syndrome
Yeah.
than anybody else than most 19-year-olds? And if so, what are you doing sort of to further protect yourself?
Yeah. So when I first got diagnosed, it was found that I had a lot of immunodeficiencies. So I recently had booster shots. I'm hoping those are kind of helping me to combat anything. I know they said that my immune system doesn't really go on overdrive. So a lot of things that have been affecting is I think it's called cytokine storm,
Mm-hmm.
where after your body fights COVID, it's fighting itself.
Self,
My
right.
body can barely fight COVID, I think, so it cannot fight itself.
Right.
So if I got past that, I wouldn't have to worry about the cytokine storm. So in some ways it's helping me, in some ways it's not. I've
Right.
been just trying to limit my circles and wear masks. But I know a lot of people don't really understand when I say I'm immunocompromised. They are like, oh, so like just stay in your room. But that's not realistic.
Right.
I still have school and I still have things to do. I have to go out and eat.
Right.
So
Well, and to your previous points and what have you, if you were, I have to imagine if you were confined to your room 24/7, that would be a potential trigger for you.
yes.
So it's really not an option for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. So I'm being safe when I'm out, and when I'm inside, I'll be fine. But I try to find that balance. So hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get a little better there.
Well, I'll make sure I keep everybody updated on how you're doing as we get further and further out from when this video airs and whatnot. So let's go back to the support group that you're starting to form. Obviously, you're doing it within Elon. And how are you getting the word out? And how has the response been so far? Because I know you said there's just 3 of you, but I'm sure you've started to try to promote and get through the noise of COVID and whatnot. What kind of steps are you taking now to try to develop the group and grow it out?
Yeah, so right now we're working on getting approved as an organization on our campus. And so once that's done, we're planning on sending out a lot of emails. We've already done a lot of word of mouth advertising, and the response has been great. We're not really sure exactly yet how many people will be interested because people will say it, but it's a different story. Especially now, it's a little difficult because people don't feel comfortable opening up over Zoom always because who knows who's in the background. And so right now, this is supposed to be a confidential group, kind of like an anonymous group. But with that said, how it's somewhat difficult to completely ensure that over Zoom. So right now we're trying to work on gaining that trust and finding people who are willing to start with us on Zoom. Eventually, our goal is to be in person and being able to be in a 100% confidential group where we know there's no one outside or lurking in the corner. But we
Zoom bombing you and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We haven't, once we get approved as an organization, we could start really spreading the word. But the response has been great from what we've heard. People really like the idea. People want to help us. We have someone from Disability Resources who has already agreed to help us as our faculty supervisor, and she's excited. So that should be really good.
Well, good luck on that front. But I mean, I'm wishing you luck, but this is actually not an unusual effort on your part because you did co-founded, excuse me, a 501c3 when you were in high school, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what's that organization called and what's that do?
So that organization is called Change for Good, with a 4 not spelled out, the number. So that is kind of, that organization is somewhat of an umbrella for all charitable events, where it's mostly for high schoolers, but it's really open to anyone, where they could come to our website and they could either find an event that's happening in their area, or we could give them what we call our toolbox, and we could help them create something that to raise awareness or money for anything that they would like to do in their area. And we help support them financially and just through advertisement. And so people could donate to us because we are a 501c3. We got taken on by a law firm, and we are super grateful. And so from that, we're just trying to get as many students involved and be able to do what they want to do, or get as many teenagers involved in community service work and do what they're interested in, because sometimes it's difficult to get interested in community service work if there's nothing out there you're passionate about. So we're giving them that availability to do something they're passionate about.
And so from what you're saying, obviously this is still live and still ongoing, and you've been doing this even while you've been going to school, correct?
Yes.
So how are things going with it?
Yeah, I mean, right now we honestly have passed it off to high schoolers so that they could kind of stay in contact. But I've obviously kept it up to date with the organization, and we're doing great. And many students are trying to get involved. Of course, again, COVID has kind of derailed that a little bit. And so we've had to put a few events on pause.
Mm-hmm.
But we're trying to do this to help develop the youth of America, to sound not as I'm not trying to sound cheesy, but that is what we're trying to do. So we handed it off to people in high school to help run it, so that they could get their friends involved and get involved themselves, so they get experience before entering college and then eventually the real world. So.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, high schoolers, you give them a purpose or a goal and whatnot that might keep them interested, and then they pass it down to future high schoolers coming in and whatnot. So you just keep perpetuating it. Now, I want to go back now to your family, because if people who have watched this channel may recognize your last name, because I had your mom on previously. She was episode 2 of the series, and we talked about the Holocaust education, but she's one of the ones who sort of gave me a heads up about your background, what you've been through and whatnot. But let's talk about now how your interactions with your family were when you were younger, how they have changed since your diagnosis, and then what you think, or if you have advice for kids who may be having these issues, on how to broach the topic with their parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I luckily had such an amazing home life growing up, and currently my family's always been so supportive, and so we've always been just a very close family. They're my best friends, and I can't say anything more than that. They were just always there for me. We'd always be playing games and helping out each other, and we had a very open communication style. We tell each other everything, probably to a fault a bit, but we were very open. And so I was lucky there that I had such a happy childhood with a great family. My sister is definitely my best friend, and my parents. I could spend every second of every day with my whole family, and I would not get bored or annoyed. Maybe a little annoyed, but
I was about to say, hey, you're still 19, so let's.
But like, even quarantine, I loved every single second of spending of the whole time with them.
Yeah.
And so I was very blessed growing up with that. My family, originally after my diagnosis with mental health issues, they were very good about it. They were trying to understand those who had mental health, kind of wanted me to react the same way they did. And so that might have caused some issues. And those who didn't had a difficult time really understanding, but they tried. And so
Mhm.
there was no like, oh, you're making this up. They really tried, and over the years they've taken steps through doing research and reaching out to people and trying to get other people's opinions just to hear what they could do better. So I mean, I really like applaud my mom. She's such a big role model for me, but even with that, she may not have understood what I was going through, but she made it her mission as my mother to be the best mother for me, and is went to all different resources, talked to all different types of professionals and friends who've gone through things that were similar to try to help me and to try to be like as supportive as she could be. So that's one thing I definitely suggest for parents is reach out to people and try to understand as much as it's hard to understand. Don't try to deny that it's happening,
Mhm.
or blame yourself. I know that I see this a lot, that, and this might have been a little bit of an issue, but it's definitely resolved itself, is that parents, when their child has mental health issues or they get diagnosed, they start to think it's their fault and that they did something wrong. And what did they do? But sometimes it's not about you. It's really not. And just
I
being
love that
there,
line, by the
where's this?
way.
Yeah.
That's a great line.
So just being there as a support system is really big. And one thing that both parents and friends can do is just ask how the person's doing. It's crazy how much little things go a long way, especially people who have diagnosed mental health issues. I know it's crazy, but I'll get texts like, "Oh, I had such a great time with you the other day. We should totally do that again." And to anyone else, this would just be, "Oh yes, totally same." And in my head, I'm like texting my mom, "Oh my God, this person had a great time with me." And as crazy as that seems, it's just because we want to feel validated and we want to feel like someone cares.
Mhm.
So getting that validation, it's not because we're needy, it's because our brains just work differently and we just need to know that someone cares. Um, and so just asking, hey, how's your day going? How are you feeling? I get a lot of, I don't want to say excuses, but, and it's not people's fault because they don't really understand. But when I'm trying to say, well, you never even asked me how I was, I've said that to people because I've gotten in disputes where people don't understand and they try to blame me for it. And then I'm like, well, you never even asked how I was doing, or when I'm in my room crying, like you never even checked in on me.
Mhm.
And this is just throughout my life. And people are like, well, I didn't know I was supposed to say anything. I didn't want to make it worse. I didn't know if I'm overstepping. And I'm here telling everyone, you are not. To anyone, if they're depressed or anxious, as much as they want to be alone, hearing that they're not alone is so huge. It really does a world of a difference to know that someone just cares enough just to say, how are you doing?
Well, and it sounds like it's one, that's basic human concern to a certain extent. But two, it does sound like there's also, you're walking a line where you don't want to overstep. So, in your opinion, is it better to overstep as opposed to understep? Now, I know this is just from your perspective, but is it better for somebody to sort of overstep in a caring manner as opposed to understep again in a caring manner?
Yeah, I think that you never see someone go down in a spiral because people care too much.
Okay.
If you think about it, you see people go down in a deep hole because they don't feel like they are cared. And this is just from my opinion and from my experience. You never, people may get annoyed with you because they want to feel like they could do this on their own. But I've never seen anyone go into a deep hole because people care too much.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
I
most
mean,
people
I like
are,
that answer. I mean, that's
yeah,
that's good for people to know
yeah.
because I'm like that. If I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I want people to know that I'm concerned, and sometimes I have a tough time figuring out, even with my wife.
Yeah.
I hear some sniffles from the bedroom, and I'm like, do I go in? Do I let her cry it out, or what have
Yeah.
you? And
So
so,
like the way I would probably go about most things would be just asking, just talking. And if they want to be alone, just be like, okay, take your time. You're like, I'll be out there if you need me, just so you know, I'm here. So if they want to be alone, that's fine. But
mhm.
just at least make it known that you're here and if they need you, that you're listening and that you care.
Well,
It,
I can tell you,
yeah.
over 16 years, I've learned my role is just to walk in, hug her, keep my mouth shut until she asks me a
Yeah.
question or something. And then if she doesn't, just walk out. So uh,
Yeah.
we've had many a conversation where I never said a word. So,
And sometimes that's all people need,
right.
like just showing that you're there and
Mhm.
not just trying to run away from the situation or kind of avoiding because you're uncomfortable.
Yes.
And this is the general you, then that means a lot. It means more than people realize.
Well, let me ask you that. So, comfort is a big issue. It's why a lot of people don't approach people with either mental or emotional issues because they're just not comfortable about it. Do you ever find yourself uncomfortable when talking to people or dealing with people who have maybe issues different from yours?
Um, so there's definitely times where I do feel it. There are times where you have to kind of you feel like you're walking on eggshells a bit because you
Hmm.
don't want to say the wrong thing, and that's not a bad thing. That's you being a considerate person, and of course, it could be uncomfortable because you don't know what their person's going through, and so you want to just you let them kind of guide the conversation. So so you just want to make it known. There are people who do feel uncomfortable, and that's to no fault of their own. The only time I feel uncomfortable talking about my own things is when someone is obviously uncomfortable with me talking about it. I think it's the best thing to just kind of put it out there. And so people know they're not alone and people know what these issues are. But if people are obviously uncomfortable about it and don't want to talk about it, it's uncomfortable for me to talk about.
Hmm.
For me to talk about my own issues if they don't want to hear it. So it's definitely a balance. But I think that the best thing is to acknowledge that you may feel uncomfortable, but just make it known that you care.
Okay. And it's a feeling out process. I mean, you can't. Maybe you don't blurt out, "I'm uncomfortable, but I care," but maybe
Well,
you
no,
say
of
it in a
course not. You
different way.
never say that.
But some people might. Like,
Yeah.
you never know. To your point,
Best
everybody's
thing is,
situation is different.
yeah. And I think one thing I really always appreciate people saying is, I may not understand what you're going through, but that does seem really difficult. And I'm sorry you've had to go through that. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And like, them pretending like they know what I'm going through is not going to help anyone. And then pretending and them just like not caring is not going to help anyone. Them acknowledging that they may not understand, but they are here for me and they acknowledge that that might be difficult for me and they're sorry I've gone through that. I'm not looking for pity. I'm just looking for acknowledgement. I think
Hmm.
sometimes that definitely can help too.
Okay. So I want to get to, let me see what time it is. Yeah. So I told you time is going to fly by during this. So one of the things that I do want to get to is your openness about your situation, both the syndrome and the mental side and emotional side of things. When did you write the blog, of which, again, I'm going to put the link down below? When did you write that blog and what made you decide to sort of publish it?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think I must have been like a sophomore, junior in high school. Honestly, I was frustrated with someone in my family just for not understanding, and that's again no fault of their own. I just
Sure.
got frustrated, and I at that point wasn't on the right regimen of everything, and I really just wanted to like write down how I was feeling so people would understand.
Hmm.
And I wrote it down, and it felt really good. I felt like it was pretty polished, but I didn't feel like telling anyone would do any good. I thought that if I showed it to anyone, I'd make them feel bad for for whatever when it wasn't their fault.
Hmm.
I really didn't share it, and I kind of just like kept it in my notes in my phone for about 2 years, and just kind of let it sit there. And then eventually, um, someone in college, I was talking, and they had someone in their life who's going through mental health issues, and they didn't really know how to deal with it. They kept being like, I just don't understand. And I was like, maybe I'll show them what I wrote to see if that kind of helps them understand what mental health is. And I showed it to them, and they were actually able to kind of get a little bit more of a grasp to what was going on in their person's life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, maybe I'll just, put it on the world if anyone else wants to just see it. And I actually ended up sending it to my mom, and my mom was like, wow, this makes a lot more sense. I've never really understood how you were thinking, but this kind of makes a little bit more sense to like this shadow. And because I was explaining that, and she started to kind of turn this different perspective. This was last year I posted it, and she was showing it to her friends with my permission, of course, but I was like, of course, I want everyone to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And ended up showing it to other people who in turn were able to give her advice. So I wasn't very open about my mental health. I used to never just kind of like blurt it out. If it like came up, I just kind of like brush it aside until I was in college. And once I got to college, I kind of vowed to myself that I would just kind of be a more open person to help people, so that maybe this isn't for myself, but for other people, that if they just hear how I'm just talking about it so nonchalantly, that maybe it's just as nonchalant as any other illness to talk about, that it's just as normal of a conversation to have than anything else.
Well, I have to admit, when I read the blog, if I had known the context, I would have thought this is a typical family situation, and you're just trying to get out whatever frustration you're feeling about it, until you put it around the context. And that's why the language, I think, is going to surprise people when they read it, because it doesn't, I mean, except for the shadow part, which I think people are going to have a tough time really visualizing or putting their mind around. Everything else in there is just everyday human frustration, experience, and whatnot. And it just so happens that yours comes about in mysterious ways, or ways that they just can't pinpoint as of yet. And I think you should be proud of that, and definitely publicize it, because I think it will give people, both who experience it and don't experience it, some context around the issue and better ways to maybe think about it.
Yeah.
So we're as I look at the clock, we are now at like 45 minutes. Now, my final question is, do you want to go longer than your mom, or do you want to go shorter than your mom? Because I do have a couple of follow-up questions here.
Yeah, follow-up questions.
Okay.
I can figure out a little bit.
Let's see if we can wrap this up in a couple minutes. So what year are you again?
I'm a sophomore.
You're a sophomore. So you've got 2.5 years to go as of the recording of this. What are your, I don't want to say what are your lifetime objectives. What are your objectives for those next 2.5 years, aside from getting to graduation and building out this support community that you've started?
Yeah, I think those are definitely the main ones right now. But also finding and solidifying those people that will be those ones who will come to me and who I can talk to. And I found great friends, and I will continue to find great friends. But I think that's one thing that I just want to have, that support system, that I could talk to them and they could talk to me, and we feel comfortable with each other. So that's definitely one big thing. I'm also, apart from that side of things, I'm an entrepreneurship major, so I'd like to come up with as many inventions as possible and kind of put myself out there as much as possible.
That's fantastic. That's the one thing that I wish, to a certain extent, I was in school now versus when I was, because when I was in school, there was no such thing as entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurship course. And now my university has an entrepreneurship summit every year.
Yeah.
And there's a whole line of study in their business school and whatnot. So that I give you definite props for, and say, stay with it. It's the hardest thing you'll do, but it's also the best thing you'll
Yeah.
do. So if you come up with ideas, I'm more than willing to listen to them. So if you run your own show, I'm good to go to talk to you
Okay.
about that. So to that end, you're an entrepreneurship major. And what do you do for fun? Because you are 19, so I've got to ask, what do you do for fun when COVID is not keeping you locked down and what have you? What do you enjoy outside of everything we've already talked about?
Yeah, so I'm a sister of Alpha Zeta Delta, the sorority. So that, of course, I just joined when COVID hit, but outside of that, there was like a lot of events with sisters we could go to, both like charity types of events and just like bonding. So that's something I love to do. I'm also a huge game night person. I love just board games and just chilling out and doing that. So that's something I definitely like to do. And I also am a photographer, so I take photos for Shutterstock, and I also just take photos for myself. So
So you take photos for Shutterstock. Very nice.
yeah.
I did not know that. See, I learned something new. I thought your mom told me everything about you, but apparently she didn't.
hmm
And so what's your top three board games?
Oh God. Okay, Skippo. We just recently found over quarantine, and that's one of my favorite games. Um, Rummikub and Bananagrams. Those are my favorite.
Rummy Cube's one of mine too.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I love that game. In fact, I play that with my wife and mother-in-law whenever we go to visit her. So it's that I'll give you props on. I like that one. Well, okay, we're done. This was fantastic. I really sincerely thank you for doing this. I think your openness and everything you've been through has been pretty amazing, and I hope people get a real positive vibe off of you the same way I did.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And so, good luck the rest of the way. I'll keep people updated in the notes section as we go along because obviously I work with your mom on occasion, so she'll definitely update me on certain things. But so that's Lexi Arnold. I want to thank her again for joining us. I want to thank everybody who watched this episode. I really appreciate your time and attention, and I hope you're able to take something away from this. Again, hit the subscribe button with the bell so you'll get notified when future episodes every Thursday morning are put up online. And until next time, Lexi, you take care, okay?
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I'm Sean O'Rourke signing off. See ya.